Welcome back to Lettermen Row, ladies and gentlemen. It is a big week for everyone involved at Lettermen Row because it is offensive line week. It's a big one, Andy, who's in the middle of the screen. It's a big one, Tim, the 41-year vet who's back from Pinehurst, who's in on the other side of your screen. And it's a big one for me, Spencer Holbrook. We are covering the Ohio State offensive line, the much discussed, the often ridiculed, very seldom ballyhooed the last couple of years, and now projected to be better offensive line, if you will. Andy, just the general outlook. I know both tackles are back. They've got a veteran center who is expected to be the starter there. They've got some promise at guard. Like, where do you want to take this, Andy? I'll let you kind of take us where we go.
Well, they have the added benefit of experience, which they didn't have last year. They had 3 starters leave for the NFL ahead of the 2023 season. The biggest surprise there was Luke Whippler leaving, which opened up the center hole, which, Carson Hinsman seized and started there all 12 games, then got benched for the Cotton Bowl. And now there's a competition between him and Seth McLaughlin, which you alluded to is leading right now. Seth McLaughlin seems to be ahead in that race. But I think for me, when I look at this offensive line, I think the left side is really solid. I think that Ohio State has to be confident in the pairing of Donovan Jackson at left guard and Josh Simmons at left tackle. Just the growth that Josh Simmons showed last year, first of all, to come in after the spring season and immediately be the left tackle. We were talking about Josh Fryer as the guy that was going to be the left tackle last season. And then immediately after Josh Simmons comes in, they swing Josh Fryer over to right tackle, and Josh Simmons is the guy at left tackle. So I think that says a lot about what they think of him and his athleticism. And it seems like he's catching up his technique to that athleticism. So you really like that pairing on the left side. I think the question marks that we will discuss now is what do they do about the right side? I think that's the big question.
Yeah. What team in the country has 2 starting centers from 2023 on its roster? That's what Ohio State's got with Carson Hinsman and Seth McLaughlin. I like Carson Hinsman, especially down the road. And we'll talk in a minute probably, or maybe I'll just bring it up right now about where he could actually end up as this goes, as they seek their 5 best offensive linemen. But I think that speaks volumes about this offensive line compared to this time a year ago when you've got 2 centers who both started the 2023 seasons for 2 damn good teams, Seth McLaughlin at Alabama, of course, and Carson Hinsman at Ohio State. The intriguing thing is the right guard situation. I think we all believe that going into or at least I believe going into the spring, that Luke Montgomery would seize on that opportunity. You just get the vibe that he did not, in the sense of there's no doubt this is our right guard, because Carson Hinsman, like we said, when they put the first team offensive line out there for the first time in the spring game, there's Carson Hinsman at right guard. And then, I just keep singing this guy's, maybe praises isn't the right word, his potential. Tegra Shabola looks the part. He seemed to have a great attitude about him during the spring, and we'll see if that attitude is carried over through the summer workouts and where it lands him at the beginning of preseason camp, because Tegra Shabola definitely has all the goods to become a viable member of a starting 5 up front. And you're right, Andy, that's the only question mark on this offensive line is who is your right guard?
Yeah, for my money right now, I've got Tegra Shabola as the right guard, because I think you look at the progression in the spring and the attitude, Tim, like you talked about, the way that he emerged in the spring from backup tackle candidate once it's very clear that Josh Simmons is going to hold down that left tackle spot, because he was, I know people don't like to talk about this, but he was pretty good last year, all things considered. And he's now a 25-game starter at the college football level. Like that's a lot of experience. Josh Fryer looked like he was locking down that right tackle spot. Well, okay, Tegra Shabola is a swing guy. He can play both. So where better to try him than at right guard? Well, he kind of seized on that. I thought he looked really good in the spring game. If you watch back over some of those reps, especially run blocking, like there's some road great to this unit when Tegra Shabola is in there. I'm not saying that those other 2 can't, but like I just think it looked a little cleaner when Tegra was in there at right guard. And, you put a big body like him who could play tackle next to a big body like Josh Fryer, And the right side might be your road grading side, while the left side could be your athleticism side where you do a couple other things with them. So I think that gives him some positional flexibility. If you've got Tegra Shabola in there, he's more veteran. He's been in the weight room longer than some of these other guys. And so that's where I'm starting to lean with this. And, does that mean that Carson Hinsman is bad, or that he, starts one year and then doesn't start? No, that not at all. And I actually think that he's going to make a better guard down the road than he will a center. But that's just the way that I see this shaking out right now. And then, if that is the way that it shakes out, I think you've got some real depth, Andy, on this offensive line for the first time in a few years. Like maybe since you've arrived here, Andy. Like I don't know if you've seen depth on the offensive line in the couple years you've been here, but if you've got Luke Montgomery, who's a borderline starter, you've got Carson Hinsman, who's a former starter, and you've got George Fitzpatrick, who I talked to a couple people this past week who are very excited about his future at tackle. Like you're starting to see, and Ian Moore, not even to mention him, and Josh Padilla and Austin Sarabeld, like the depth here is starting to build. And I think the Buckeyes are finally maybe starting to turn a corner when it comes to getting over the woes of yesteryear, I guess, a few years ago, and finally getting into a section where they believe they have some good depth on the offensive line, Andy.
Well, the other thing I'll say about Tegra Shabola is that he was the extra tackle in that Bison package in the Cotton Bowl. Only played 5 snaps, but when they had an extra offensive lineman out there for 5 running plays, they ran for 41 yards, and that was way more productive than any other running play strategy they had throughout the rest of that game, and that was pretty much an offensive headache. So that is something also that he did get in for that postseason game, had some success. So they could even, use him for tackle depth as well if they needed to. That's kind of a break glass scenario at this point because they have shifted him over to guard, but he can do both. I wouldn't rule out Carson Hinsman. I mean, I know you're not. I'm just saying that, like, when you got a guy that started 12 games, I think that puts you at a leg up on anyone else who hasn't started a game, period. And so I think that can't be forgotten. And I think, Carson Hinsman was quite open about a lot that went wrong for him last year. Didn't want to get too much into the benching, but he did talk about how he wasn't playing at the right weight last year. He wanted to be bigger like Luke Whippler, but couldn't put on good weight. So a lot of it was water weight. At times he was as low as 280, which is just way too light to be playing offensive line at Ohio State. He also talked about how it was hard for him at the line to navigate silent counts. That's another thing Josh Fryer talked about that he struggled with last year. They played 6 road games. They don't have to deal with that this year in the regular season. They're not going to have to go through that, week after week in tough environments. They only have 4 real road games, and one of them is a neutral site game, really, at Wrigley Field. So I think those are all things to look at. And with Carson Hinsman, it seems like he's turned the corner as well. Weight-wise, he's up to 298. They like his agility at the guard spot that kind of fits in. That's a lot we talked about Luke Montgomery, just being fluid within the Chip Kelly system that has like a lot of movement for the interior, offensive line position. So I think that's a really intriguing competition between the 3 of those guys, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, and Tegra Shabola. I really don't know if I have a favorite right now of those 3 because I think it's a really good competition. As for the depth, I think that comes from Justin Fry now having his guys that are older. I mean, you talk about Austin Sarabeld, Josh Padilla, even someone like Miles Walker who's coming along. Of course, Luke Montgomery we mentioned. Those are guys that he brought in and now are maturing and are going into pivotal years with this program. So I think that's where the depth comes from. The real question is, are they going to develop? Because I think the biggest concern last year at a certain point was when Ryan Day quite candidly said, well, the second team offensive line isn't pushing the first team. And that's when he was getting questions about, is this the best 5? I think around the Maryland game. And when that's not happening by October, there's some real questions about what's going on development-wise. So they have the guys, they have the depth, but are they going to develop? And I think that's still the concern for me.
Yeah, Tim, I'll tee you up here on this one, Tim. I think that just came from look at the second team last year. It was Austin Sarabeld was playing second team guard. That's a true freshman. Luke Montgomery's in there as a second team guard, true freshman. I know Zen Mahalski, Enoch Vamahi were in there, but those guys didn't show you anything to become starters that late into their career. So you kind of turn to the youngsters. Well, if the veterans weren't good enough to beat out the other guys, and then the youngsters are a little too young to play, you don't have many options. And I think that's, I think you couple these 2 things that Andy and I are talking about. It's like, by default, these guys are a year older and a year more comfortable with Justin Fry. So the depth should be in a better spot, should it not, Tim?
Yeah, you would think so. It was a knock on wood. It was a knock on wood situation last year that you don't want to lose a starter, because who was going to go in, and that's why I think this emergence of Tegra Shabola is so huge because guys, especially on the offensive line, mature at their own rate. You can talk about the assembly line that they go through. They're at the classic football factory realm, but guys are different, man, coming in, and they have to mature at their own rate, either mentally or physically. And in some basically with offensive linemen, it's usually both. But just like we're talking about Carson Hinsman needing to basically be bigger. It's really funny, a guy that grew up on a dairy farm. He should have been drinking whole milk. He must have been drinking. No, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, guys, I personally know a fella who went into Ohio State way back in the late 1970s. This was just a regular friend of mine who was 6 feet tall. When he left Ohio State, he was 6'5". You know what I mean? So different guys have different growth rates at different times in their life. So, but yes, and and I see, for example, the two Armstrong brothers, as freshmen, probably not going to factor into the two deep. You never know, but they're both extremely competitive. That's what I like about this room. When I watched them in the spring, there's an esprit de corps there that I think is undeniable about guys who know that some of these guys understand their projects, but they're busting their butts. I mean, George Fitzpatrick, to me, that's hard for me to say for some stupid reason. George Fitzpatrick there, I tried that third time and it worked, is a great example of a guy who suddenly is blossoming. And Tegra Shabola took him a little bit, he's blossoming. And Luke Montgomery, he's a guy who didn't quite get there in the spring like we thought he would. But like I said, boy, give him another 3 or 4 weeks of preseason camp, and you may see him really coming off of the summer. So I think the competition in that room is so much better than it was this time a year ago from a projected standpoint. And we'll see if it pays dividends.
Yeah, Tim, the depth here, I don't want to compare it to that, but you talk about guys being on different trajectories at all time. Look back to the best offensive line I think we've seen at Ohio State in a while, the 2019 line. Wyatt Davis and Josh Myers were second-year players who were just better than everyone else, so they played. Well, who they play alongside? They played alongside at times Joshua Alabi, who was like a 6-year senior who didn't develop until then, but became a pretty pivotal depth piece. They played alongside Jonah Jackson, who was at Rutgers for a while and then made the step to the big time to Ohio State. They played alongside Brandon Bowen, who was really promising in 2017 or 2016, breaks his leg and misses the 2017-18 season. And then he develops in that last year in 2019, and then he ends up in the NFL. So it's possible for the development path to be there. And I just think that I think there's a lot of people, and I don't think we are among them, and I don't think that there's a lot of them, but there are some people who think that there's still this stud mindset where, it's still the room that Justin Fry inherited. Well, this is not the room Justin Fry inherited. This is Justin Fry's room now. And if he is the offensive line coach that Ryan Day hired him to be, if he's the offensive line coach that coached with Chip Kelly in 2021 and had one draft pick on that line, but still was able to pound the football at a really high level, then you should expect some really good stuff from this line, and not just the first team, but also the depth behind it.
Yeah, and plus now he's coupled with Chip Kelly again, and Chip Kelly is a we talked about him ad nauseum about the run game thoughts that he has, much less the passing game, and you just get the idea they're going to be definitely on the same wavelength like they were at UCLA, a couple of years ago. So I think that, it's really funny when it comes to coaching football, but because people have to be kind of on the same wavelength in the sense of what they're trying to accomplish, from a scheme standpoint. And that's where I think it's going to pay dividends. Also, kind of these hidden little changes, nuances that have been made over the offseason that I think are going to pay dividends for this offense in terms of like minds. When you got Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, And then Justin Fry, working with a guy that he worked with before, was the offensive coordinator for that guy, or at least co-offensive coordinator for that guy. I think it's going to, they're basically speaking the same language. And I think that's huge.
I agree. Andy, closing thoughts as we wrap up the offensive line discussion here. That we could, I'm telling you guys, I really do think we could sit here for 2 hours and talk offensive line because there's so much intrigue with this unit. But I'm going to hold us to like a 15-minute mark. I'm going to give Andy the final word.
Yeah, I think what Tim said is really important. I think that can make all the world of the difference. Just the scheme changes, little tweaks that Chip Kelly makes. I mean, it's not like he's bringing in his entire offensive system. This is still the Ryan Day offense, but Chip Kelly's working within that. And if you can gain some confidence on the ground, I think pass protection becomes even easier. And by the way, this unit wasn't bad at pass protection last year. It just really struggled to run block. And if you have the right scheme tweaks to be able to help these running backs that are supposed to be, maybe the best tandem in the country with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, you could be looking at a really exciting combination, especially with a really easy schedule at the beginning of the year to build some confidence going into, some marquee matchups later on. I think that there's some intrigue with that setup there early on in the year. And I think you guys laid it out pretty well. The depth is there, but also I think just the veteran experience that they didn't have last year is there. And I think that can sometimes be fool's gold because I don't think returning starts is always a guarantee of anything. But I do think the changes that some of those returning starters have made, whether it's Josh Fryer trimming body fat and looking quicker and bending better, whether it's Josh Simmons, refining his technique this offseason, whether it's Donovan Jackson, putting past some of the demons from last year behind him and trying to hone in on the All-American skill set that he has. I think there's so much there to like from this group. And I think there are still questions, but far fewer than there were this time last year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm actually really high on this offensive line unit this year. I know that you know that because I talk to you about that a lot, but Ohio State fans, like if you don't know yet, I do believe this is going to be a really good offensive line this year. I see the potential. I see the growth. I kind of see the vision a little bit. And so we'll see what happens. We are going to be back on Friday with a full predictions video. We do it every week. We're going to predict some stuff for the offensive line. It's not the easiest group to predict because you're kind of, predicting what the run game could do under the offensive line or predicting what, the sack numbers look like. But we're going to do our best to put some predictions together. Make sure to come back to Lettermen Row's YouTube channel for all of that. Those predictions are always fun. They're rarely right, but that's okay. We'd like to have fun with them. And then you can go to lettermenrow.com and get the full coverage of Offensive Line Week. Just $1 for your first 2 months when you use the code OSU1. That's right. 2 months gets you all the way to August, almost to the season, right? Butting up against the season. You're going to get coverage of probably the starting quarterback being named, probably a starting offensive line getting put together, probably some defensive decisions being made. And you can get it all for two months for just $1 when you use the code OSU1 at lettermenrow.com. Go there now, get that deal. We will talk to you guys soon, and we will see you over at lettermenrow.com.